This is Family Ghost, and we're live on the air with Diana Winkler. And this is the first time she's been on the podcast, and we're happy to have her here. We do have to mention Newsly.me. They're our sponsor. They are an app on iOS and the Android store. And if you use coupon code GHOST2021, yeah, that still works. You get 1 month free premium subscription so you can stop scrolling and start listening. So this podcast is on Newsly, so you can actually listen to it there after we're done. So again, check out Newsly and use the coupon code GHOST2021 to get 1 month free premium subscription. And so now I'm really happy to have you on the show. It's always cool to meet new people. That's one cool thing about podcasting. You get to meet interesting people from around the world. And one of the things I want to ask you first is like, when did you first get into music? Like, what age can you remember being into music?
Oh, I've been in music ever since kindergarten. I loved to sing, and even in the kindergarten plays, my aunt used to give me quarters. So I would sing as loud as possible, and I would ask my aunt, "Did you hear me all the way in the back?" And she would say yes. So she would give me a silver dollar. And so that was the start of my music journey. I was in plays, I was in choirs, I did solos, and I also took dance, ballet, and then in college I did formal vocal training and piano. And so that was the start of my music.
So were you always interested in being like a singer-songwriter or actually performing music that was already composed and being part of a group, or like what was the format? Were you part of like choirs or your individual artist, or how did that work?
I always thought that, only famous people could write music and create things. I always sang other people's music for a very long time. And there's a lot of great music out there, that. I was an 80s, 70s, 80s kid, and my parents had a very eclectic collection of music from several different genres, many of the greats that we all know and love. And it wasn't until I was in college that my music teacher, she was a songwriter, and she wrote all these beautiful songs. And the first song that I wrote was for my wedding to my now ex-husband. But she helped me write a song, and thought, wow, I'd like to write more songs. So I started just dabbling in it after college and didn't really publish my own songs until I was married to my now current husband, Brian.
Mm-hmm. So it's interesting because I'm a singer songwriter, and I was always drawn to like I'm a child of the '70s. I'm 54.
Yeah.
So I was drawn to like the Carpenters. I was drawn to Motown. I was drawn to like Stevie
Yes.
Wonder. My dad had Songs in the Key of Life, right? And he
Yeah.
had the full LP, which was really big record. It had like two albums and like a 78 and a 45, and it was just a massive record. And I'm like, wow, this is unbelievable. And my dad really got me in. He would actually sit down and play Brubeck on Saturday night. He played Miles Davis. He played Coltrane. He plays Nat King Cole. And he said, you know what? We're not watching TV. We're going to listen to cool music. And then we just kind of hang out with my dad. And he was really into like everything that's good. From the Carpenters to Motown. And then my older brother, 7 years older, and he was into like Zeppelin and Hendrix. So I ended up hearing like everything, from the Carpenters to Hendrix to like, Steely Dan. I was like listening to everything that was cool. And even my mom was from Morgantown, West Virginia, so she was listening to Waylon Jennings and Johnny Cash. And I was like, yeah, that's awesome, like outlaw country. So that's different. And so I was getting it from all sides. And it's like pretty cool, and it gave me very eclectic taste. But so it kind of seg into like the whole background of Christian music in Christian college and the other issues you had with the church. So maybe we ask you like, when did you become a Christian?
Well, I was raised Catholic. My parents are Catholic, and my cousins were Baptist, and we went to my cousin's wedding, and we stayed with my cousins, and they had vacation Bible school, and we were going with our young cousins to vacation Bible school. And now I was raised with a lot of morality. I knew right and wrong. I knew who Jesus was. I knew what sin was.
Mhm.
I knew that Jesus died on the cross for me, but I never really knew if I was going to go to heaven or not. You know, they always would say, well, the nuns and the priests, well, they get an automatic ticket, but the rest of us,
You got to work on
you
it.
kind of have to work on it. You're not really sure. And at this vacation Bible school and talking with my cousins, it was the first time I've ever seen the Bible verses and the grace of God, that salvation was by grace and nothing that we can earn, and that I could know for sure that I was going to heaven. So I sat up all night asking my cousins questions, and then I decided, well, I really don't want to go to hell, because I knew what hell was. We were taught that growing up, and I believe what my cousins are telling me is the truth, that I need to make a decision to follow Jesus myself, not depending on what my parents believe, not depending
Mhm.
on my works or the sacraments or any of that. And so when everybody went to sleep, I went, and I was 13 years old, and I prayed on the bunk bed ladder by myself, and I said, Jesus, I believe in you. I believe you died on the cross for me. Will you please save me? Come into my life. And, I thought I was going to feel the warm fuzzies, but I did. I didn't feel anything. So I prayed again. And then I thought, well, I think God heard me. And so I'm going to go to sleep. And the next morning, I stuck my head over the bunk bed ladder, and my young cousin was underneath. And I said, well, guess what, Amber? She said, what? I got saved. And she must have thought I had won the lottery. She was jumping up and down, and yelling and screaming. And she ran down the stairs to tell the rest of the family. And my parents were back home. They did not know the decision that I had made. Um, when I went home to my parents, they did not understand the decision that I made, and they said, "Well, you need to go to the Catholic Church till you're 18, and then you can decide what you want to do after that."
Mhm.
So yeah,
So they were
that's what I
more
did.
into like in the Catholic Church because that's what they had known. So they kind of wanted you to
That's
go that way.
that's what they had known, and they weren't really appreciative
They
of
weren't really appreciative
my cousins, I guess,
of
proselytizing me. So I wasn't baptized until I was 18, and then we went to an evangelical Christian and a Baptist church after that.
Mhm.
So,
What was the environment like when you went to a Christian college? Because that's one of the things I wanted to like understand how that's different. Like, I went to like a regular like I went to school in Maine at a college called Lincoln College. Like it's like Amherst or any of those small New England colleges. So I don't have that experience. So what was it like?
well, it was kind of like Christian Disneyland. I went to Catholic school up till the fourth grade, and then I went to public school and a public high school. And so when I started going to a Baptist church, I got called to go into full-time ministry as a missionary. And so, of course, you have to go to college. And showing up at college, it was like, everybody is talking about Jesus and God bless you. And they're quoting scripture verses all the time. And, you know, it was just like I said, it's like a Christian Disneyland.
Hmm.
and everything is rosy and everybody's smiling and happy. And uh,
What was the
now I
point
think
of what you were going there for? Was to get to be a practicing like pastor? Is that what you were trying to do with that education?
actually a church planter, so I would start churches
Okay,
around the
so that
country
was the goal
or
of like so that what you were being taught is how to actually do that.
yes, it was a missionary school where they trained you. Rubber meets the road. How do you start a church?
So a church
And
planner, I
yeah,
haven't really heard that term. Like, can you define what that actually entails?
yeah, that's a long process. So after you finish college, and usually most missionary folks, they get married. So and they do what's called a deputation, meaning they go and raise support. They travel to all the different churches to raise support, so they can go live in whatever country or place that they decide to go to. After they've raised their support, then they usually go and get trained by a mission board. They train you on like language school or culture. Like if you go to Japan, for example, there's certain cultural things in Japan you have to know and that sort of
Yeah, I lived
thing.
in Tokyo. I lived in Tokyo
Yeah.
from 2004 to 2006,
So
so
you
I had
you
to
know
live in it, so
exactly.
I understand.
So yeah, you go and you learn the cultural stuff and then you fly over there or travel to where you're going so you can find a place to live and a place to have a a meeting place for
Mhm.
the church. After you moved all your belongings and left everything behind, you start, you know, trying to learn the language if you haven't already learned it, and you go and you knock on doors, literally knocking on doors and inviting people to come to your very small gathering.
Mhm.
And it's usually a lot of evangelism one on one. And you start very small with the people that you reach, families or individuals. They come in, and I've planted a few churches, and it's a lot of work because you're starting from scratch. You have to be the pastor. You have to be the music. You have
Mhm.
to do the child care. You have to do cleaning the bathrooms. You have to count the money, all that
Yeah,
stuff. You
it's
have to
like
do
kind of
everything yourself.
yeah,
It's
it's
like
somewhat like
starting a business.
yeah, so it's business, but it's religion and it's business at the same time, so you still have to be mindful of, like, things in the kind of real world because, a lot of things are like ideological or scripture, like, it's like the heart and the feel, but then you gotta real it's like, well, you gotta pay a bill, you gotta pay the rent,
Hmm.
or you gotta pay, take care of the bathroom, like you said, those are kinda like things that you can't, like, you know, though you can't get away from. It's like the things that are part of, like, normal everyday life that you have to take care of. If you've got a place you gotta take care of, then you have to do that. But, so when did it kinda degrade into, like, an abusive situation?
Oh well, that's a story. I was not raised in an abusive home. I was raised in a very good home. Parents that loved me. Now, my family wasn't perfect, but it wasn't abusive. My
Mhm,
abuser was my first husband, who was a missionary along with me, and
mhm,
we met in our home church, the same church I got baptized in, and he got baptized in, and we met in a singles group. And dating him, there were a lot of red flags that I should have seen that I did not see. A lot of controlling, a lot of losing his temper, a lot of name calling and gaslighting. Um, I know what those things are now, but I didn't recognize them then.
Was there
And in
anything that about being in the church that made you not see those things? Or was there? Because you had told before there's like a kind of Disneyland and rose-colored glass type of thing, is there a tendency not to want to look at things that are negative and
Well,
not
I'll
try to
tell you,
not,
that's a good question. The church culture, and this is in a lot of churches, you are pressured to get married. You know what I'm saying? It's
yeah,
you
maybe if
get
you're not
married
ready
as
either.
soon as possible. If you're even sitting next to each other, you know, they glorify marriage above all. They glorify serving as a pastor or a missionary, and they glorify getting married as soon as possible and having as many kids as possible. And they also, many churches do this, is they teach about, well, your husband is your leader. You're supposed to submit to your husband, and you can't do anything for God unless you're married, that kind of a thing. And so it's a great question, because, you know, I was very ignorant and naive. Let's just say I was 20 something years old, right?
Mm-hmm.
22 years old was the first time I got married. And you want to believe the best about people. And even though you see really terrible things, or your person you're dating is treating you terribly, you kind of just downplay that because you want to serve the Lord, and in whatever country you're going to, you want to be a good Christian, and being a good Christian, quote unquote, is getting married, being a missionary, and going off to some foreign country. And so, yeah, you do put some rose-colored glasses on unless you were raised in a different environment. Like I said, it was Christian Disneyland, and everything is, you know, praise the Lord, and you weren't allowed to complain about anything.
So I guess the issue is, like, you know, a lot of times people have like counseling. Like if you are in a more secular situation, you might even have a counseling through your job, right? Like a lot of corporate American jobs, Fortune 500, they have counseling, so you can go there for all kinds of things, right? Was it like discouraged to try to do that because you're just supposed to do it in the context of this Christian kind of Disneyland, and you're not supposed to do that?
We weren't allowed to go to a secular counselor. We had Christian counselors, like we had premarital counseling. And it was pretty much, you learned all the Bible verses about being a good wife. Proverbs 31 is very familiar. And submit to your husbands, and husbands, love your wife as Christ loved the church. And, you know, of course, we weren't allowed to sleep with each other beforehand. And of course, they talk about intimacy and all that stuff in Christian counseling before you get married. But they did not prepare you for an abusive relationship, a man that is narcissistic and wants all this attention and pretends he's a different person in front of the church, and then he's a different person at home. And
so I guess the question then is, like, so if you run into that kind of scenario, you're saying that the counselors in this kind of context don't really even want to hear about that scenario because they feel you follow your husband because it's part of the scripture, right? So they're not even wanting to hear that he could even be potentially bad. Is that the case where they don't even think that a man could be bad?
Right. That is very common. They will normally, if a woman complains that she's being mistreated, it's usually the woman's fault. Well, you must have done something to annoy him or to set him off. You need to pray more. You need to read your Bible more. You need to do whatever he says. Don't want to get him upset. Have more sex with him, obviously after marriage. But yeah, it was very common that they would minimize any kind of, well, you know, this is abuse. No, it's, you must have caused it. So
that's not really help. The thing that's interesting is, like, you're in the college, right? And you're like a free thinking person, but then you're told to not free think in that context. and only follow these rules that which are kind of subjugating you and putting you in a power dynamic that's not good for you. And maybe
Right.
at a higher level, people are thinking, well, I should submit to this structure because that's good. But if it doesn't make you feel good and it's abusive, eventually that's not going to come out good for you
Mm-mm.
unless you push it down and never deal with it.
And I did
So,
that for 13 years. So
so when you had the types of abuse you've kind of hinted at, can you go into more like depth of like it was psychological or different types of abuse, that situation that you were dealing with? You said like
so
narcissistic.
we got married in 6 months. Again, we were kind of pressured by not my family, but his and the church to get married soon. And the abuse started when we were dating, but it was even more prominent when we were on our honeymoon.
Hmm.
We got married, went on our honeymoon in the middle of college recess, and you save yourself for marriage, and you know that the honeymoon is for getting to know each other physically. And when we were on our honeymoon, he did not want to be intimate, or I would show him how my body works and he would get all upset. And he's the man, and you don't tell me what to do. I know you better than you know yourself, and I'm the one that's supposed to make the bells and whistles go off. And he was very arrogant, and he
Yeah,
got so mad at me that he left the bed and breakfast that we were at and drove around the block for probably an hour and left me there crying. And I was like,
but that's the
I mean,
dream
right away, I was
scenario.
like, I made a mistake in marrying this man, because I had looked at, okay, all the things that happened when we were dating, and now it's like, okay, this narcissistic, and I didn't know the name of it.
Yeah,
I didn't know the
but you
label of
felt
it, but I knew it was,
but you
this
felt
was
it.
not right.
So you
This
had
was not
hints of
right.
it, but the whole problem seems to be that the structure of the church was such that you didn't get to really know the person before you got that far, right? Because they tell you not to. And then you got hints of it, but then it gave you no way to really talk to anybody about it. So
Right.
you couldn't really do what you could, and maybe outside of that structure, you might have been able to go to like some type of counselor and say, hey, and they would say, hey, that seems kind of codependent, or he seems narcissistic. Is that really the right fit? But they won't even question. You couldn't even go there, right? You weren't allowed to even think about that.
Well, we got, let's see, we got married during the playoffs in January. And when we got back from our honeymoon, which was terrible, uh, it was like a week before he wasn't even paying attention to me. And I was kind of like walking around the apartment and, in a negligee. And I called up the marriage counselors that we did our premarital counseling with. And I said, is there something wrong with me? Because we came back from our honeymoon and he hasn't been like interested in all in being with me. He's watching football and whatever else. And I'd walk across the TV set and he would say, you're blocking the set. And the counselor, she just said, well, just give him some time. He's probably just tired and he'll be fine. But that was a pattern during our entire married life, was he would avoid intimacy. And it
But
wasn't until we were, divorced that I even figured out why. But
so that must be very frustrating to be like, because you're like taught to save yourself for marriage. It's by this big letdown because you maybe had these expectations, very romantic expectations. Like, I as a person, like I married the first woman I ever was intimate with, and I had all these expectations, right? I kind of followed the
mm-hmm.
same thing. I wasn't super religious, but I still followed it in my own mindset. And sometimes you put too much pressure on the other person or too much pressure on yourself. You think there's like this the kind of idealized romantic thing, right? So sometimes people
Mhm.
idealize romance and they think it's going to have this perfect cruise on the ship or you're going to have the perfect honeymoon, and then like your partner gets drunk and blasted and they can't even function, right? Or they
Yeah,
don't talk to you, or they're
I
watching the
know.
sports, or there's all kinds of horror stories I can hear from my cousins and my uncles and everything. They like, oh, it wasn't what we thought, right? It was like this supposed to be this big dream, and it didn't come out the way you thought it was supposed to be. So it's a kind of
Yeah,
a letdown,
yeah.
you know, because you're not being honest. Yeah, I think what the problem is like if you really communicate, then you can get the feel if you're really connected to a person. But if you're told that there's all these structures where you can't communicate because they put these boundaries, how are you ever going to really know if you're compatible with somebody if you put in all these walls? Then you never really see if they got a mask. Like if somebody has a mask and you can't really
Mhm.
get past it, you won't know who you're with.
Yeah, people hide things from the person that they're dating because they don't want them to know their real self, and it's usually too late after the fact.
Yeah, once you
Uh,
get married, then you're like, oh, I bought that. I bought the package.
you
I
bought the package and you can't return it, and yeah. Um,
so that was a very a very depressing type of situation. So did that have a combination of like did you get depressed along with the abuse and that caused like issues like can you talk about this like this part is depression and feeling like hopeless or not able to change that situation? How did that affect you? Was that part of the
well, that's a great question because I really was a sincere Christian and I wanted to be a good wife, and I really thought that things would get better, and I had prayed to the Lord, and I said I'm going to just make, lemonade with lemons, and I'm going to do the best that I can to be a good wife. And I actually thought I could change him with my good behavior and um, all the things that you're supposed to do as a wife. But that didn't really happen. Um, we were church planning, as I described. We were stateside planning churches, and you have to put on this front that everything is okay because you're the leader.
yeah, that must be hard
Everybody's
because you're
looking
in
to
that kind of
you. You
you're
can't
in this public.
show them.
Yeah, because you're in this kind of public facing thing, right? You're in this thing where you're building a church. So you're not like doing the 9 to 5 job. Like you have all these people around you that are probably looking up to you. So you're saying
Hmm.
before that there's like your husband had this like mask that in front of other people, they maybe thought he was a better person than what you were experiencing, right? So that must
Hmm.
have been really frustrating to like see him in action with the people outside of your home, knowing that what he did inside the home. And so, how did that make you?
Yeah, then we were married 13 years, and it was, you got the exhaustion of being in the ministry. It's like I say, you're doing everything and you work long hours. And we were bivocational, meaning you don't get paid very much as a missionary or a pastor. So a lot of folks, they'll get a job during the day. So you're exhausted, and then you go home and you're being ridiculed. You're, the house isn't clean enough. Um, if you ever gained weight, I don't think I would get turned on by you, or all these things. You didn't put gas in the car. Your cooking isn't good enough. You spent too much on Christmas gifts. All these things to beat you
So you
down all the time. And
so you're never.
I've never had any
So I
problems with
guess
self-esteem, you know what I mean?
until you met somebody that was actually not building you up, because it's kind of like this idea. I'm a poet and I'm a songwriter, right? So I've had this kind of idea, like a couple of things. Like if you think about people say falling in love, right? but that's kind of
Mhm.
negative. The connotation that you fall isn't exactly uplifting, right? The idea, like I started running my poetry was, well, why can't you be ascendant in love? Why can't you have a love that's ascendant, which means you both feel like you're going together? But you're kind of in the wrong type of love life. You're always falling, right? You're not feeling good. You're kind of falling into traps where it's like it's supposed to be good, but it's not,
Mhm.
you
You're
know.
right.
And so
I
it's
mean,
like the
I know.
connotation, like yeah, it's very sorrowful. It's not doesn't feel good.
Yeah, I didn't have any problems with self-esteem growing up. My parents were always very supportive and spoke truth into us and encouraged us. And it just living with somebody that is constantly saying these terrible things about you, like my music. The reason we met, I was singing a solo in church, and that's how we met. He wanted to meet me because I sang a solo, and he was a record producer in Philadelphia. He did like let's see, Don't Call Me Francis, and he used to run sound for Hootie and the Blowfish before they got big, and used
Oh
to
wow.
do albums and stuff. And he said to me, "Oh, you have a great voice. You should record an album." And I had never heard of normal people like me
Doing a record.
recording an album. And so we would have a studio in our house, and this was back in the day where you couldn't just go to the store and buy recording equipment. You had to, know people, and it was very, very expensive to record an album. But we had a recording studio in our house, and he had done everybody else's album except mine.
Oh wow.
You know,
So
and
so he like
I'm a
he said that he liked your voice, but then he never really did it.
yeah, that's the way to control somebody. That's the way he controlled me. And each year he would say, "Well, what would you like for Christmas?" And I said, "I would like to record my album." "Oh, well, no one would want to listen to you sing. You're not all that in a bag of chips. You're nobody. You're just, you're not that great." I'm
Well,
like, I mean, I'm a trained singer. I
yeah,
sing in church all over the country and some parts of the world, and it was really disheartening. And that's the kind of person that I lived with. And you ask about the depression. It was probably about year 7 that I really started to shut down as far as depression, because you're not allowed to get divorced, and things would just get worse. You can't appease somebody by your behavior. No matter what you do to a narcissist, it just gives them more power when you submit. And
yeah.
that sounds crazy, but um I did start shutting down because I realized I am stuck in this marriage. I can't get a divorce. I can't leave. I'll lose my ministry, and I'll have to start over. I won't have any money. And we weren't rich, but we were
Yeah.
comfortable. We could pay the bills. And
So you're
I
kind of
did
stuck
start
in
getting
there.
depressed.
So
I
you get
did
stuck in the
feel.
yeah. I mean, you got stuck in the paradigm where you're so like norms are that you can't get out of it, and you're just supposed to handle it. So at some point, that must have got to a breaking point where you did realize that you were gonna have to get out of that, and it was gonna end up like upturning your whole world. If that was your world, to make the decision to get out of it is a really big deal. So how did that start to happen?
Wow, it was a long time before it got so bad that I was just a shell of a person. I had stopped reading my Bible, I had stopped praying, and now I was still doing church stuff because I had to, and put on that plastic smile, and everybody thinks that everything is okay, and I'm super Christian, and but the controlling was just getting worse. He would have me followed. He would accuse me of having affairs with everybody from the choir director to the aerobics instructor to the librarian, you name it. He was accusing me of things and being discouraging with the music ministry that I had, and telling me what kind of jobs I could have. This is the job that you're going to have. I'm talking about the day job. And
Yeah. So
this
he's
is the car
controlling,
that,
like,
this is
wow,
the
so
car that you're
every
going to drive.
so it's like micromanaging your life to like every extent. Like he's going like your car, your choices, like what you can do, what you can't do.
My choices were taken away from me, yes. So this is the car you're going to drive. You're going to drive the clunker, and I get to drive the brand new car. And,
Yeah, so I mean, he's
you
really
know, you have no say
like,
in any of it.
well, that's like a very domineering kind of control person that's putting you under in trying to subjugate you. What actually was pushing you down. So how did you start to see the light where you could get of it? Like what started making you think that you could get out of it?
Well, it was a hard awakening. We had our 13th anniversary, and, all the intimacy issues we've ever had, it was, nothing had changed. We were attempting intimacy because that's what, was expected, and we literally banged heads. We zigged instead of zagged. And all of the stuff that from the 13 years in our relationship was just terrible, and being in pain, physically pain, and we're mad at each other now, and it's like, forget it. I went to bed crying, and he went into the living room and watched whatever, and just cried myself to sleep like I have done it many times. And I woke up the next day and I said to God, I cannot do this another year, another
So
day.
that finally came to you yourself. You just hit the point where you're like you're not going to deal with it.
I cannot deal with this. And, I know I'm just highlighting a lot of stuff. There's a lot of things that I can't say everything in an hour, but um, I hadn't prayed in a long time at that point, and I told God, I said, I don't care what the consequences are for leaving, but I'm getting out before it destroys me, because I can't do this. Again, I was a shell. I was depressed. I never considered suicide. I knew that there's a better life out there. It just wasn't with him. Like, I don't care if the
So when
church is against it, I'm gonna get out.
so to get out of this relationship, do you had to get out of that church? Is that what you ended up having to do?
Well, the next day I had called one of my girlfriends, one of my best friends, and I had said what had happened the night before, and she said, Diana, I'm sick of you calling me up and talking about this abusive husband that you have. You need to get out of that. And I said, well, I can't. I don't know how I'm going to do this, because the church won't let me get divorced, and I'm going to lose everything. And she said, you know what? God is not going to stop loving you because you left your abusive husband. You need to get out of there now. And she said, I'll help you. And that was the wake up call for me, because I really thought that, even though I was a Christian, I really thought that God was going to punish me for leaving, or God wasn't going to love me anymore for leaving. That's one of the reasons why I didn't leave. So I thought, well, I
So
won't be
that
a Christian anymore.
so your friend really like gave you like that path to make you see that there wasn't anything wrong with it. You kind of like the counselors you went to never were going to tell you that, but you actually had a friend that must have loved you and thought
Mhm.
that you need to hear something like that. And it's kind of so is it disappointing that like the church itself allowed that kind of behavior, and even though they had counselors, they never thought to 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 think the way your friend did, right? To tell you that
Well,
there's nothing wrong with getting out of it if it's not helping you, if it's hurting you. Why would God want you to hurt? And they didn't
you
even.
made a very big point. You made a very big good point, because I didn't mention that I dragged my husband to 3 different counselors in the church. And you know what they would say? They would say that you must not be submitting enough.
Yeah.
That's why you have marriage problems, because you're not submitting enough. You need
So that
to.
they that seems like that is a toxic enabler
They are
structure. Like,
enabling.
yeah. So I mean, if the counselors are like 100% of the time going to say that abuser is not at fault, it's the person being abused is to blame, that kind of counseling is never going to solve anything. It's always going to defend the person who victimizes people. And
Well, he never hit me, so that was the thing. He never physically hit me. He did every other kind of abuse, but he never physically punched
but
me.
that can be just as real. I mean, that
It
the
is.
psychological can cause so much damage if you see the way the
Mhm.
world is with the alcoholism and other things that people get into, because the mind is just as important as the physical. And if somebody is with your mind, and it can damage you significantly, and maybe people can't see it, but I think people do see it because you can see in many different scenarios that like psychological abuse is very real, and people don't want
Yes.
to deal with it, but it's something that people have to actually own up to and not act like it's some kind of mysterious thing or it's not real, because it definitely is.
Yeah, yeah, I know some other friends of mine that they'd go into counselor's office, black and blue, beaten to a pulp, and the church still says, "We have to still stay with him." And I'm totally against that. And when I left, because my friends, 3 of my friends that did not go to my church are the ones that helped me to get out. And
Yeah, because
we waited until my husband went out of town for business, and I packed up my stuff and stayed with one of my girlfriends to get out. I took my belongings and I left. And when he found out that I'd left, he wanted counseling.
but then he wanted it.
And he
Yeah.
wanted it. He was, not cooperating when we were in counseling, but now all of a sudden he wanted counseling. And
Well, was
our
it because of
our
what it
pastor.
looked? Was he more concerned about the outward appearance
Mhm.
that it would make
He
him get
he
shamed?
didn't have
And to think,
yeah.
yeah, and so that he want to fix it for the outward appearance, but probably still not really fix it.
Yeah, he didn't want to lose his ministry because he would be disqualified and he wouldn't have, somebody to control anymore. But the pastor we were planning a church with, he wanted to meet with me. Can you, meet with us with one counseling session, just for me? And I said, well, I'll come for one time, but I'm telling you right now, I am signing the divorce papers. I'm going through with this divorce. I mean, save a parting of the Red Sea miracle. I am going through with it. And so yeah, I showed up at the pastor's office, and my ex was crying his eyes out, the crocodile tears, and he said he was sorry. And I said, I forgive you and I don't wish you any harm or anything, but I don't believe that you're ever going to change. And we
Mm.
started talking about our marriage issues, which were many of them. And he started blame shifting me. And well, you did, and you didn't this. And no, stop right there.
So he's like
I'm not,
gaslighting and all that,
yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know what that was then, but I know what it is now. And no, if you're not going to take responsibility for what you did, then this is over. And I left. And divorce was finalized. I left him everything. I just wanted out. But yeah, I lost my church. I did have to leave the denomination. It was really hard because all my friends were in the church, as you can imagine, and they took sides because, of course, he told everybody that I had left him and he wanted counseling, and I refused to reconcile, and they wouldn't
So were you
believe
not
me when I
able to?
said,
Yeah. So I mean, were you able to maintain the friendships in that environment, or did you end up having to like drop all those and deal with the people outside?
I
Was there
had
anybody?
to leave my denomination, which was Fundamental
So they're
Baptist.
not nobody in.
I have maybe 10 friends from that circle of my former life.
Oh,
I had
they still stayed friends with you. So some of them did. They didn't totally cut you
some.
off.
Some of them did. I like I say, had some true friends that believed me and were on my side. But I've made new friends. I
Mhm.
I had a friend that went to Bible college with me that started a church on the other end of town, and I went to his church, and he and his wife welcomed me in with open arms, with just as I was, and they knew who my ex was, and that
Mhm.
was like the start of my new life. Was it easy? No. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but I wish I had done it sooner. But
Did
there
so
were
did how
definitely
did so how did that really like you had such a strong belief that you couldn't do it, and then suddenly you realized you could. Did you have like guilt for making that decision? Because if you're in such a strong structure, did were you able to like to reconcile and say, hey, I gotta leave that behind. I'm not gonna feel guilty about it. I'm not gonna feel bad about it. Was that like a really hard, dark time, or did you feel like once you got past that, that you actually got into the light and that time was over?
Oh, that's a good question. You know, being a Christian, and I was as sincere as possible as a Christian, I mourned the loss of my marriage because I am pro marriage, and I was, I promised to, till death do us part, and pretty much I had to mourn that part of, okay, I failed at my marriage. A little bit of blame for myself here, which may or may not have been in the right place, but that really hurt me for a long time. I had to process that. I went through counseling on my own, and I went through divorce care, and um, but yeah, I did have to process the anger of wasting 13 years of my life with that man. And thankfully, we never had children for more than one reason, but I'm glad that I didn't have to put my children through that.
So, like, you have this term like mending the soul. So, is that the result of this whole aftermath of this thing that you actually found a way to mend your soul?
Well, I'll tell you what happened when I left. Uh, the first thing that I did was I recorded my album.
Oh, you did what you
That
were
was the
trying to do.
first thing.
That's a
Yes,
good
that
thing to
was
do. That's
that
a
was
good
the
thing.
first thing that I did was, bless God, I'm gonna record this album if it kills me. And so I had it recorded in 6 months. I hired a studio and I did it. And that was like my bucket list. And then um I got LASIK surgery because I had worn bottle cap glasses since the 7th grade. These are just reading glasses, but he
Hmm.
told me, you can't have LASIK surgery, they'll butcher your eyes.
So you
That was
kind of
another way of controlling me, right? And
yeah.
that was the second thing I did was I got the LASIK surgery 2 weeks after I left, and my my sister lives in France. She had lived there since '99, and I was not allowed to visit her because my ex did not like the country and did not like my sister. And so that was
So
one
he
of
kept
the
you from your sister because
kept
he was
me.
that controlling. Wow,
He was
that's not
very controlling. He would not let me go and visit her. And yeah, since I left, I've been there twice now, but but I got all these goals that I've wanted to do, you know, and it's weird getting your own place and being able to make your own decisions and choose your own furniture and the clothes you wear and the music you listen to. And the sad part
well. It's cool to
was, yeah, the sad part was I was ostracized from my former church. So my new album, you know, I had sang in all these churches, and none of the churches would let me come and sing and or even do any kind of release party. So that was kind of depressing.
So were
Um,
they actively trying to ban you because of what happened?
yeah, because if you're divorced, you can't really serve in the church. That's a big no-no. You're
Uh,
ostracized from doing anything for God as far as leadership. So I had to, you know, mourn that okay, I'm gonna go have to find new friends and a new church and new music. And yeah, my music, because we weren't allowed to listen to anything unless, you know, it was unless it
approved.
was conservative hymns or classical music, which I enjoy, but we weren't allowed to listen to any secular or any contemporary music. And so I had the floodgates open that I
Well,
got
yeah.
to listen to all these things. And I thought,
Well,
oh, I
that's a
should learn
very
how to.
well. Being a producer and a musician myself, you know, I would have a hard time with that because, like I told you, I'm very eclectic and I'm all over the map, and I find that as part of my creative process, the ability to be able to listen to like a Wailing Jennings and then listen to a Led Zeppelin, right? Or listen to the Carpenters and then listen to like you know or something like I just to be able to have the freedom to just I can check something else out and maybe I can learn from that as a musician. Being a keyboardist, learning different techniques from different genres to me is illuminating.
Exactly.
It's like to learn funk and then learn bebop jazz or to go and learn jazz is totally different techniques. And if you're told, oh, you can't listen to it, then how are you ever going to learn it? You know?
Hmm.
So, but
It was
yeah, so
really, that was really life
free,
changing.
yeah, it must have because as a musician, like we kind of live on that. You live on your influences and your reference points, and even subconsciously, as a musician, you find yourself, sometimes on a keyboard, you might be phrasing something that was in deep in your subconscious and you didn't realize it. You go back to the tape and you're actually doing a Coltrane phrase or something, or you're doing a Davis phrase, or you're doing like something from the 20s you heard and it suddenly shows up because it's kind of like that's what happens. But like if you have a limited palette, then you can't do that. So it must be really
Hmm.
eye opening that you were able to get that palette back and more access to stuff. So I would make you like a better musician.
So to answer your question about mending the soul, I wanted to help people who have been through the same thing that I have been through. I didn't even know that this existed, that other people who were in church ministry went through abuse. Never
Hmm.
knew anybody else that went through this until I got out. And then I really wanted to start a ministry. Well, all the doors had closed on me because every church that I had been a part of after I left was like, although they were supportive of me, they were like, well, they really didn't want to get involved with domestic violence. It's not
Yeah.
a sexy topic. It's not a feel good topic. It's very uncomfortable. A lot of churches sweep it under the rug. And so it was kind of discouraging at first because, well, God, I know that you want me to help other people who have been through this. I need to have something good come out of all the suffering. And it wasn't until I met my now husband, Brian, who is also a survivor of abuse. When we went looking for a church to join, the church that we have now, I talked to the pastor's wife and I said, I would really like to start a ministry for domestic violence survivors. And she said, well, we already have one. It's called Mending the Soul. And I'd like to invite you to come and be a part of it. And Mending the Soul it's a small group of survivors. It's 4 people and then 2 facilitators. And you go through this curriculum that was designed by a trauma counselor and an ethics and theology professor here in Arizona. And you process all the different kinds of abuses, every abuse you can think of, and how to heal from that and how to prevent from being a victim again. And I had never heard of it. I never knew anything like that existed. And so I went through the group myself as a survivor. And yeah, I had divorce care and I've been through some counseling, but nothing to the depth that Mending the Soul has been. And I went through my own group and it was really life-changing because I had healed some, but there was a lot of things that the corners that hadn't been swept out, or this room I didn't want to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
And I was so impressed with Mending the Soul that I went and trained so I could facilitate my own groups. And so I started doing that 2000 and 12. And I've been doing that since 2012, and it has changed so many lives. And after the pandemic came, and I'm probably getting ahead of myself, but I started writing music with my husband about healing from domestic violence. So we started writing songs. I'm in my studio now. My husband's a drummer. His drums are behind me, and we got the guitars, and then my keyboards behind me. So we write music about healing from abuse. And I started the podcast, The Wounds of the Faithful, because after the pandemic, as you know, everything shut down. So my Mending the Soul groups I was leading had to switch to Zoom, and we had to stop doing gigs and performing outside of the house. And people needed more.
Yeah.
People needed more after we were finished with Mending the Soul, because it's 4 months long. And they were locked in with their abuser sometimes. And so I started the podcast, The Wounds of the Faithful. So there were more resources for my peeps.
Yeah.
And so I'm at 95 episodes right now.
Well, that's good.
And I'm in the middle of creating and recording another album. It's going to be a healing concept album. So some more originals that I'm writing, and then some cover tunes about overcoming and healing. And so I'm super excited about that.
So people can find access to all your information at the link that we're scrolling below, right?
Absolutely.
DSWministries.org.
DSWministries.org. You can find everything that you need to know about me. And
do you have your albums there? Can people get your first album from there?
Absolutely.
And they'll be able to get the next one from there too.
Yes. I have some of the singles on my new album that I've recorded, but my store has my
And when you
tour,
can people book you through the website?
Absolutely.
Well, that's
I
cool.
have a booking
We
page,
are.
so
So I'm sorry, but we are at the hour point. But I do like to give everybody a shout out. We have been scrolling your DSWministries.org, and we encourage everybody to check that out. That will be a clickable hyperlink when this goes onto all the platforms that we're on, and we will be on Spotify podcast within an hour, and all of these other places that we are: Twitch, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Will have the clickable link to that your main DSW Ministries org within the description. So they will be clickable. So that will help you out with your campaign to get more people to be involved. So I really appreciate the fact that you came on the show. It's
thanks for
very
having
enlightening.
me.
Well, I think it's very enlightening to go through different things. We to talk about other topics, but I think it's always good to expand your reach. And I've been expanding into different areas than what I normally do. And I think it's always important to listen to voices, especially about people who have been abused and people who are trying to solve it. And I think I really appreciate the fact that you came out of that and then you decided you want to help other people. And I think that's a really good thing to do in life, where you can life lessons that you can take and help other people. I think that's
Mm-hmm.
a commendable. That's a really awesome thing to do. So I appreciate that you were on the show today.
Thanks again for having me. I'm happy to help anybody out there listening who want to contact me.
Thank you again, and have a good night.
Good night.